Good evening, everyone, and welcome to attendees both in person and online to the Deeren Public Library. Two Michigan authors, not one, but two Michigan notable book authors, Ghassan Zeineddine and R.S. Deeren, are here to discuss their books, Dearborn and Enough to Lose. Before we get started, I have a few announcements. The format for tonight's talk will be as follows. 40 minutes of conversation and then 10 minutes or so of Q&A. For those people in our auditorium, copies of both Mr. Zeinidine's and Mr. Deeren's book are on sale outside. I imagine both authors will be glad to sign their books afterwards. I want to encourage everyone to take part in our Deeren Library summer reading program that starts Saturday. Program information is available online on our website, deerenlibrary.org. Please join us next couple of announcements. Please join us next week as we will be talking with a couple of great authors. On Wednesday the 5th, we will be talking with Adam Higginbotham, author of Challenger, a true story of heroism and disaster on the edge of space. On Thursday the 6th, we'll be talking with Will Cockrell, author of Everest Incorporated, The Renegades and Rogues Who Built an Industry at the Top of the World. Don't miss out on these great opportunities. Now, the Michigan Notable Book Program is sponsored in part by Library of Michigan Foundation, the Michigan Center of the Book, and Michigan Humanities, which is funded in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our two participants tonight are well-known and gifted authors. Ghassan Zeineddine is Assistant Professor of Creative Writing at Oberlin College. He's the author of the book Dearborn and the co-editor of nonfiction anthology Hatad Baladuna, Arab American Narratives on Boundary and Belonging. Mr. R.S. Deeren is the Assistant Professor of Languages and Literature at Austin Peay State University. In addition to writing Enough to Lose, Mr. Deeren's work has been published in Joyland Magazine, Great Lakes Review, and anthologized in John Freeman's Tales of Two Americas, Stories of Inequality in a Divided Nation. So please welcome Mr. Zeineddine.
Well, thank you, Dan, so much for the introduction. Thank you to Dearborn Public Library. Thank you to you all for being here. Raymond and I are just so happy to be here, and it's an honor to share the stage with you, Raymond. So we actually attended the same doctoral program in Milwaukee, but I graduated, I think, several years before you did, and so we never really crossed paths until just this past February at a creative writing conference in Kansas City. So it's really neat to be here with
it's
you.
been a bit of a whirlwind too, because like you were the mentor to somebody who mentored me,
Right.
and so that is and I've been told Peter Brzezinski says hi, and Sherry Hoffman is probably online right now, so hello, Sherry.
Hello, Sherry, dear friend of ours.
And yeah, it's been we also had the same advisor with Valerie.
Right.
And we wrote these, and also our books came out on the same day.
Yeah, I mean, it's December 5th.
And then we met in February, and then I got an email from Dan that's just like, yeah, the two of you are going to be on stage together.
Yeah, this is great.
I was like, oh, great, fantastic. Dearborn, my family's all from Allen Park.
Right. So yeah, it's so exciting. So I guess we could we can like read from our books and like we'll have a conversation and just keep it like free flowing. And I guess we could it'd be interesting. I always find it interesting to talk about like how these books came about. And how like the stories communicate with one another. And so would you like to start things off by reading or anything, and then
I can do that. Yeah. Well, we think maybe like 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I'll read for about 5 minutes, and somebody sent me fan art.
Oh wow.
Titled Another White Man.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm a little starstruck. This is such an honor. It's really good to see folks here. So I will read, I got a timer right here. I'll just read from the beginning. The collection is,
Brandon,
what?
that's the voice I want.
Oh, okay, sorry. That's my mom. Thanks, Mom.
Sherry, it's online.
I'm going to read from the first story, which is great. We wasted enough time, which we're gonna start at the top of the minute. This is the mirror. The river crested 10 feet too late, so there'd be no saving the house. FEMA had designated the land between the river and the house Zone A with no base flood elevations determined, which meant that in the grand plan of putting houses where people wanted them, but not necessarily where nature would tolerate them, it was legal from the county's perspective to build. Go ahead, said the surveyor. At home on the banks of a lazy river, said the realtor. You've always wanted your own place to fish, Jackie Chubbard said to her husband, Chubbs. It was all she needed to say to convince him to buy. From an insurance perspective, though, no base flood elevation meant no flood coverage, which meant no claim, which meant that the new carpeting the Chubbards had just laid, the pots and pans from the wedding registry, and even her mother's ottoman, the same one Jackie used to sit on as a kid when she listened to the Tigers game on the radio while her mother drew a diamond on a napkin to track each hit, were all nothing more than memories floating downriver, waiting to be collected by scavengers and scrapped. That is, after the dam water receded. Earlier that week, the weathermen had said to expect some light rain across Michigan's thumb region, with more severe storms drifting to the south and the west over Detroit, Flint, and Saginaw. That was just dandy, Jackie thought. She could finish painting the walls in the second bedroom, then start on the molding. Chubbs could do the same in the main bedroom. With 20 acres of land, mostly ash and cedar woods, they had plenty of work to do outside. And with a 30-year mortgage, more than plenty of time to get it done. 30 years, Jackie thought, as she finished outlining the door frame in eggshell white paint. They'd own this corner of paradise outright by the summer of 2016. She set the brush on the rim of the can and wiped her sweat from her forehead. 2016 seemed so unreal, too far away to fathom. She heard her husband across the hall grunting while he painted. How's it going in there? She called. Good, he replied. We need a higher stepladder. You good in there? Jackie looked over the outlining she'd done. The room was the perfect size for a child's bedroom. The neutral color on the wall could easily be coated over with whatever color a teenager might want. Then, once she and Chubbs were empty nesters, it could become a hobby room. She always loved pressing flowers. Maybe by then they would be painting these same walls a different color, anxiously awaiting a visit from their daughter or son. Jackie placed a hand on her belly. When to tell her husband. The last time, they'd gotten too excited, told too many friends and family, which made her pregnancy not taking even harder to handle. This time, it would be best to be sure before telling anyone, including Chubbs. Doing fine, she said. I wish it would stop raining, though. She poured some paint into a roller pan and began the first coat. That weatherman sure didn't know what he was talking about. For days, it had rained in sheets. In the middle of the first night, the two had decided to head to town to buy burlap sacks to fill with earth. They would barricade the doors, just in case, and continue fixing the interior of the house while the rain passed over. But news had come over the radio on the second day, saying that Caro had lost power and all local businesses had boarded themselves up. Fine, Jackie thought. We're off the village grid and still have power. The bathroom floor tiles need regrouting, and I can paint the kitchen. She knew Chubbs was a firm believer that as long as they had a roof over their heads, they would turn out fine. He could start his new job next week, and eventually they would have life down to a cozy routine, living fence to fence in the city, a distant memory. Let it rain, she decided. We're safe in here. I'm going to end right there. It's been 4.5 minutes.
And you know, in Raymond's short story, the opening short story, The Mirror, I mean, I'm not gonna give anything away, but it has like an incredible and devastating ending, which is just really striking.
Thank you.
It's amazing. And it's interesting because, it's like, speaking of endings, like, we both teach creative writing, and there's one thing that like, I always talk about it in class, and that is the importance of ending a story and ending it on a really strong note. Because if you have a really powerful ending, you can really elevate the story.
Yeah.
And this ending is just incredible. So yeah, I still remember it. You know, it's interesting because like our story collections, you know, they're both set in Michigan, right? And a lot of your stories deal with like rural Michigan, and my book Dearborn is about the city here. But like, it has so much in common. So in this short story, it's about like a new house, trying to find like a new beginnings. And I was thinking, okay, like the importance of like owning something, having a house, finding footing in a place.
Yeah.
Is something that a lot of my characters strive for too. Yeah, and so I thought I'd read the opening pages of the short story called Money Chickens. And
It's a really good one.
thanks. It actually has a genesis. I can, you know, I'm hopefully we can we'll get to this in our conversation, where you know, each short story in this book has like a history behind it, like something inspired it. And so this one, you're right. So this is called Money Chickens. I can talk about it a bit later, what inspired this short story. Oh, actually, also, there's another short story in your collection that deals with the recession in 2008.
Yeah, that's the title story.
Yeah, exactly. Enough to Lose.
Yeah.
And how the recession really, like, all your stories are so character driven, but like that recession has impacted those characters' lives. And in this short story, Money Chickens, that actually leads up to the 2008 recession and its impact on Michigan and on Dearborn. So it's so interesting. There's so many parallels.
We should start over and you read first and read this, and then I'll read it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is called Money Chickens. Some folks store their money in safes. Baba used chickens. I was 6 the first time I saw him shove a Ziploc bag filled with bills inside a chicken in the kitchen of our 2-bedroom house in East Dearborn one evening back in 1988. He sat at the table wearing yellow rubber gloves that reached halfway up his forearms, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The chicken lay on the cutting board. A small man with small hands, Baba had no problem thrusting his fist into the bird's bowels. He then sheathed the body in plastic wrap and placed it in the freezer. He slipped off his gloves, dropped them in the sink, and sat back down at the table to finish his cigarette. I reached inside my pocket and pulled out my pack of candy cigarettes. I loved the first puffs because I was able to produce smoke made of powdered sugar, smoke that merged with Baba's in a ghostly swirl that hung over us like a shared thought. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Baba looked out the window. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he said. I repeated his prayer, looking at his reflection in the window pane, the plump bags under his eyes, his thick mustache with curled tips. His face sagged with exhaustion. I had those very same bags under my eyes, giving me a somber, contemplative look for a boy so young. I'd been named after Baba's father, Ali. There's trouble in Detroit, Baba said. He had a loud voice, developed from years of yelling over the sound of machines at the Ford Rouge plant, where he worked. Detroit was a few blocks east. We have to hide our money from the thieves across the border, he said. I removed my cigarette from my mouth. Are we safe here, Baba? We'll be safer once we return to Lebanon. That's what the Money Chicken is for, to build ourselves a house back home. The money Baba made at the plant was barely enough to keep us afloat back then, not with a mortgage and the recent arrival of my baby sister. For the past month before her birth, he had been working odd jobs on the weekend to make extra cash, mostly as a handyman. But I saw him solely as a car maker. When I spotted a Ford sedan or truck on the road, I suspected Baba had a hand in its making. The only home I knew was Dearborn, where I was born and raised. My parents had immigrated to America in 1982, 7 years into their home country's gruesome civil war. That evening in the kitchen with Baba, I was too young to point out this fallacy. How was Lebanon safer than America when Lebanese were killing one another in the streets? Mama entered the kitchen, holding my sister in her arms. Her long black hair was parted down the middle. She wore her hijab over her shoulders like a shawl, always prepared to wrap it around her head in the event that a male neighbor came calling. She was a tall, big-boned woman who towered over Baba and me. She sniffed the air. I smell raw meat, she said. The cutting board was still on the table. I found a new hiding place to safeguard our money, Baba said, and explained his stuffing. Mama's eyes widened. She opened the freezer and looked inside. Allah have mercy, she said. Don't worry, Baba said, the chicken is halal. We can keep your pearl necklace and gold bracelets inside of one. I prefer the bank safe, Mama said. Baba looked at me, telling me through his tired eyes that this chicken business would remain a father-son affair. We communicated in a private language similar to the one used between lovers. I looked back, telling him I understood. We reached for another cigarette at the same time. And so as you can tell, like the narrator's father, he started off working at the Ford Rouge plant. And the Ford Rouge plant is actually on the cover of the book. This is actually a 1953 postcard of the factory. And it's funny, maybe we can also talk about like the revision process and how you went about like choosing what stories to include in the book.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when my editor, I was really fortunate to have to work with this brilliant editor named Elizabeth DeMio, and we were going back and forth, and she was offering me suggestions on some of the stories, and it's funny because like the factory just really has been so important in Dearborn for a number of years. It brought so many people to the city,
Yeah.
particularly Arab Americans. Actually, just this morning, I spent all this morning in the South End, where the Ford Rouge factory is, and I really wanted to make it a point how important this factory is, and I clumsily, kept including the factory in almost every short story, like a character's father works in the factory. And my editor, my editor Elizabeth, she said, the factory doesn't have to appear in every story. I think readers are going to get the idea that this is really important. This factory, just maybe you can just change up a few professions.
Yeah.
So I did do that, but yeah. But how did you come about, like, writing the collection Enough to Lose?
Yeah.
Because you're from here, you're from Michigan, and what was that like?
Well, before I want to say that, yeah, you're making such a solid point that these two books are so Michigan, but still show how unique different parts of Michigan can be. Like every region has its own coney sauce for their coney dogs, and Detroit's the best. Flint and Jackson have, anyway, but one thing that I think that I'd always thought about, I wrote most of these stories outside of Michigan. There's Enough to Lose, the title story, I started tooling around when I was mowing bank repossessions. And that's really the only story that I focused on so much while still in Michigan.
Interesting.
But I didn't write these until I was gone and looking back at it. And I did my MFA in Chicago, big city, obviously moved from a town of 4,000 people to 3 million people. And they would say, well, what's there? There's nothing there. Kind of like how folks on the coast will talk about the Midwest as if there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And really, so my family is mostly from Allen Park. And so I do have this connection of difference of, like, there's my mom, my dad, my sister, and me in Caro. So we don't have family ties there. We do have a lot of close friends. But I had a lot of, like, my early stories, I was writing about a bar called Alvin's in Detroit, which was a bar I went to when I was 15. I was allowed to be there. But I had a professor, he was from Detroit. He's like, how do you know about these places? I was like, well, there's not much. There's a lot in Caro, but we don't have a big factory like that. But for me, I was raised on a river. And that river is in almost every story. It's the Cass River, and we have this bridge. Because we always used to say, if you pass the bridge, you passed our house. And I was never allowed around the river or the bridge, I think for safety reasons. But I was always like fascinated with this bridge. So I just, in a draft of one of the stories, I called it Bucky's Bridge, and I never thought of it.
Right.
I never thought of it again. And then I was like, well, I've named it now.
Right.
It's not named, it's not a real bridge. But people have now who have read the book, they talk about Bucky's Bridge. And then there's some reviews out there that talk about iconic places like Bucky's Bridge. I was like, oh no, there are touchstones that we have. I think that was it for me. It's the river that I keep coming back to. The river and those woods.
And it almost like weaves right through all these stories.
I guess like a river.
But yeah. And it's so interesting that you said that you wrote most of them from a distance when you're outside of Michigan. And I mean, how did that, do you find that like that writing, and this quite often happens like when you're so intimate with a place where once you leave it, you might gain a different kind of perspective, and was the writing process, did you find that it provided you like a different angle writing it from outside of Michigan, like these stories?
Yeah, these stories come from love and a lot of love for this place.
Yeah.
But when you are so close to something, you can't look at it critically. And then leaving, I'm able to have a certain like detached respect for the place.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, there are a lot of problems in any part of the country, in any small places. And there's a lot of love that I have for the thumb. Like I very proudly, I always say, this is where I'm from and I'm home right now. So you all get to shake your head and be like, yeah, that's Michigan.
Yeah.
And there's some folks that are not from Michigan that become my friends, and they kind of roll their eyes in lovingly when I do it. But I was like, oh no, I'm from right there.
Yeah.
But having the distance, like it's been 10 years since I lived in Michigan, and I'm able to write, I'm having a moment right now. The first AWP I ever went to, Richard Russo was the speaker, and he was writing about small town upstate New York, and he said something along the lines of, I've never been back to my hometown. It's not the same. Why would I go back there? Wow. And I still go back to my hometown. It's still kind of the same. Weed's legal now, so. Right.
And there's such a strong sense of place in all your short stories.
And as with yours as well.
Yeah. And speaking about place, like I said this like in other places, and for me it's different because you grew up in Michigan, and now you've been outside of the state for 10 years. I only actually lived in Michigan for 5 years, but yeah, and I still now we live in Northern Ohio. It's still we're still close, and so like since moving to Ohio, I've been trying to come back to Dearborn as often as I can. And for me, like the importance of Dearborn, I guess just to kind of give some insight, so I actually I didn't grow up in America. I grew up in the Middle East, and we immigrated to the States in 1990. And we lived in the DC area, and there actually are a lot of Arab Americans in the DC area, but for some reason we weren't always in touch with them. And at our school, my sister and I were the only Arabs at school. So my Arab American experience was really isolating. And it wasn't until I got to college that I started to have Arab American friends. But it's interesting, when I was a teenager, I had heard of Dearborn. My parents used to order boxes of baklawa, the dessert from the Shatila bakery, the famous Shatila bakery. So I knew that there was a place up north that sold, that sold, Arabic dessert. My aunt's husband, he was born and raised in Lebanon, but he actually went to Detroit Mercy. And so he has family in Troy, Michigan. And so he would sometimes mention Dearborn. So I thought, well, this is really interesting. And fast forward years later, at in the doctoral program we were part of, I started to really research the Arab American experience in depth in works of literature, and Dearborn kept coming up. And I did all this archival research on the city, and I had yet to actually even set foot in Dearborn, and it wasn't until a job, and then I had I had a temporary position, like a 2-year position at a small liberal arts college in Central Ohio, and I was teaching creative writing and Arab American literature, and I had always talk about Dearborn, show them images, videos, testimonials about the city, and I had yet to even set foot in it. And then when a job opened up at U of M Dearborn, I jumped on it. And fortunately, I was able, I got the job, and very quickly I took to the city, and it was like this city is so unique because there really aren't other places like it in the country where you have such a high concentration of Arab Americans, and I remember
it's the number one.
Yeah, it has the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country.
Yep.
Exactly. Like Los Angeles might have like more Arab Americans, but it's all spread out. Where here, you just almost sometimes feel like you're in an Arab city. And I just felt so much at home to the point that it's the only place in this country where I actually really feel that I belong. And so, yeah, and I always come back. Like, I'm obsessed with Dearborn. I just keep coming back as often as I can. So like as soon as I started to feel very comfortable about the city, I started to write about it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that. Sorry,
what was the first story that?
Actually, the very first short story was the first story in the collection, The Actors of Dearborn.
Oh, really?
And yeah, this was like every single short story was like a product or a response to what I was seeing and experiencing in Dearborn. So for instance, The Actors of Dearborn, it's set in 2019, and it follows the main character is a census taker, but he's also a failed stage actor. And at the time I remember so my wife and I moved in 2018, May of 2018, and there was a strong presence of ICE agents in Dearborn. And that was during Trump's presidency. And so there's a lot of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim rhetoric. And the community was, I noticed that people were really anxious with all these ICE agents going around intimidating people. So I thought, well, how do I respond to that in a work of fiction? And then it just so happened that the 2020 census was right around the corner, and I thought, a census taker would be going from door to door in a sort of neighborhood, and that would give me the opportunity to try to capture the anxiety of the community members. So that's how it developed, like one short story after the other, like a response to what I was seeing. What about you? What was your process like? I know everyone has like a different writing process, but was it like, in writing these short stories was, like for instance, like the one Enough to Lose that speaks to the 2008 recession, was it like, you experienced it and you wanted to write about it? What was the inspiration behind some of the stories?
Great question that I wasn't ready for. Oh my goodness. I think so. I'll talk about just like my writing process, and then figure out a way to answer the question more directly. And I tell my students this a lot as well. Like, as a writer, you get to kind of be weird, right? We get to be the odd ones, and the odd one, the first step to being kind of the weird odd one is listening. And listening to people, and like public transportation, or being in your library and just listening to how people talk, listening to what they say, how they say each other, and then to yourself asking questions. So I could be sitting in the library writing a poem, and there's a couple at a table 2 tables away, and you can tell on her face that he said something he shouldn't have. And you don't know what it is, but you're like, that's conflict. And I tell my students that, like, your job is to look for conflict and then write towards some kind of resolution. And so for me, like, if I hear somebody say something, I'll be like, why did they say that?
Right.
Why would they say that? What would happen if somebody said the worst thing in response? And then I go from there. And I want to say, like, with Money Chicken, that piece does exactly what I'm always trying to tell my students to do is, we're not writing ideas. We're writing conflict, and a conflict is just a chore, do a thing. And Baba is doing a thing, stuffing money into chicken. That is a tangible thing that needs to happen. And within a page and a half, you've taught your readers what is important, what do these characters want, how are they going about doing it, and throughout all of that, like a really lovely detail that you have in there is he's not even holding the cigarette, it's just dangling from his mouth, and that teaches me everything I need to know about that character. And then you layer it so well with the son, the narrator, doing the same thing with the candy cigarettes, and it just is perfect. So for me, it's like it always starts with somebody saying something. Why did they say that? For the book itself, I had always, like, I listen to music when I write, and I listen to like not instrumental. I listen to Jackson Browne a lot and Bruce Springsteen. I listen to these storytellers, singer-songwriters, and I think of their albums as like, so Jackson Browne's first 3 albums are very much like him maturing and growing over those 8 years. And I was like, oh, I want to do that with short stories. I want my short story to read kind of like an album, and I want it to so the first story, that 1986 flood happened. Mid-Michigan got devastated. The Saginaw River Basin exploded. And my mom and dad were new. They were Detroit and Allen Park expats. And it turned out well. They're fine. They're here. I'm here.
Still there.
The house is still there. My mom was pregnant with my sister, who couldn't be here tonight. She got to work. And I'll get to that in a moment. But I thought to myself, what if it hadn't gone well? What if the water had hit the house? And then that woman's pregnant, and at the end of the book, we get to see that baby 30 years later, and she's working. And that for me, this area, when I go back there, the recession isn't over.
Yeah.
We're in 2024, and the recession officially ended in 2014. It's a decade later. And how many storefronts are empty in Caro, right? How many businesses has the Downtown Development Commission rejected outright? Because they're either too close to a church. There's like 27 churches in the Caro area, and a prayer room and in downtown. And it's not to say that Caro is awful. It's a great place to come from, and I have a lot of respect for the place. But small town America, and also these suburban areas that the factories are not working at capacity no more. Like, it's still impacting them. So I have that throughout these pieces. So all these stories have somebody doing a job. Doing a job for survival. And a lot of them are spinning their wheels. But then, like, so the title story, the narrator is Tim. Tim appears in the background of another story, and you find out that he's doing really well. So there are still a ton of people doing really well, and I wanted to mirror that. But I didn't want to. Some folks are like, it's not a happy book. I'm like, there's a lot of happiness in the book, but overall, when we talk about economic depression, the word depression is there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of, what I noticed, and it's such a treat, there are a lot of links in your short stories. Like you said, the characters reappear.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like that process of like how did like make like having I think the one character Jamaica, right? Also reappears. It's like, how did
my absolute favorite character.
It's a lot of fun, a great name.
Yeah.
And I think one of the stories talks about how, she came to that name.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like, having these stories be linked and what that process was like for you? Was it something that just kind of developed organically, or did you have to finish the manuscript first before you saw the links?
So I will say, I got to be completely honest that I did see these as linked, and they were linked by place. They were very much like a love letter to the thumb, and it was very much a manuscript that was like, the setting is a character as well. Which I feel like writers, I feel like Rebecca Makkai said something about that. It's like, no, setting is setting.
Yeah,
And that man right there, that's Justin, that's my agent, and also a good friend, and Lisa, who I was friends with first, and Maddie, their lovely daughter. He was like, you have room for these connections to come through
Yeah.
a lot more. And I thought that would be ham-fisted and that
Yeah.
people wouldn't like it.
Right.
And he's like, no, man. And then the folks at Wayne State University Press, Kelsey's over there,
Yeah.
and they all, the Wayne State Press was like, that team was very much, no, these characters, like that character in the background of The Run
yeah,
is that character from
right,
Her Guts and All. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. So
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is like, obviously we do a ton of this work.
Yeah.
But it's like your book too is not just you. There's a team of folks that,
yeah,
and I try and tell my students that, like, hey, don't see that this is a product. This is not my product.
Exactly.
This is a product of community and teamwork and like,
exactly.
so I see that. So the links were very much folks also saying, hey, you're doing really good work here. Go a little bit further and like cheering me on.
I had the exact same experience
Yeah.
with my editor, and where she, like you said, like you don't want to show your hand by having the links. And you want to trust the reader that the reader will pick them up. And yeah, my editor, she also encouraged me to push the links a bit further. And in some cases, it was amazing how she suggested some of the links. Like for instance, there's this one character, and this is totally the editor is doing. There's this one character who lives in East Dearborn. She is a 99-year-old Titanic survivor. Later in another story, you find out that she's passed away. But you find out that she's passed away because another character in another story now owns her house.
Yeah.
And my editor, she said, I did the math, and this actually makes sense. Like this character would have moved like 2 years later after your main character from another story passed away. And so you're right. It's like, I think with writing, it's very solitary, but you really need other readers too.
You're talking about the house makes me, so there's a question that I'm dying to ask with you is the idea of home. And you might be tired about talking about Speedo Man,
but
Speedo Man, get the book if you haven't got the book, read it all the way through from beginning to end, but then come back to Speedo Man as well. Speedo Man is this brilliant story of this man in a Speedo. And I'm not going to give anything away, but you have two narrators. There's the wives at the YMCA, and then there's the husband. And the Speedo Man, the man in the Speedo, is the focal point. And our perspective shifts, and we get to see this man from different perspectives. And he evokes a sense of home in these male and female characters, very different. So my question is like, what is the role and then how would these characters define home in Speedo Man?
Yeah.
And then throughout this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know what? So I guess I can answer that by earlier I was saying like how important Dearborn is to me and like how you know it really means the world to me. And I think it really like transformed my writing in the sense that before moving to Dearborn, I'd never written about my Arab American experience.
Really?
Yeah, never. Because I'd only written about my Arab experience, like living in the Arab world. And for me, I thought like, I'm not gonna write about feeling like solitary as an Arab American or isolated. Because I thought like there are already so many books about that. And I felt as if I can't contribute to it. And I didn't want to write about it. But in coming to Dearborn, like it's a very transnational city. So you have people kind of going back and forth from Dearborn to the Arab world. Obviously, you know, some people can't return because of the political situation of a respective country. It also takes financial means to kind of go back, right? But there's a back and forth that goes on between Dearborn and the Middle East, and particularly Lebanon. So in writing these stories, it really allowed me to write about my own Lebanese experience and also my Arab American experience. And so that short story Speedo Man allowed me to evoke Dearborn, to talk about Dearborn and how some people consider it home, but also write about Lebanon and
Yeah.
how that's still a home for so many different characters. And it's also generational, like in the short story Money Chickens, the father, he is hiding money from the IRS. That's why he stuffs the money inside the chickens, and the chickens are like safes. Because his dream is to build a house in Lebanon, to relocate his family from America to Lebanon.
Like a returning.
Yeah, like a return, but you know, the son considers Dearborn home and he doesn't ever want to leave the place.
Yeah.
But speaking about home, there's also like a love-hate relationship with the city that I encountered with a lot of my students in Dearborn, a lot of people I interviewed, even in my own experiences, you can get the sense of how there's so much love about this. Like this is true of any community, any city. Like there's a lot to like about a place, and there's some stuff to dislike about a place.
Yes.
And I think sometimes Dearborn can be a bit claustrophobic. In the sense that everyone knows each other. I mean, I've only been here, yesterday I arrived and I immediately saw someone I knew at the cafe. At another cafe today, I saw someone else I knew. It's just, I love it. It's great,
Yeah.
But some people want, to be a bit more anonymous, so there's like that tension that goes, that some people experience.
So you're saying the same thing Caro is the focal point of my short stories, and it's a town of 4,000 people. And the saying is like, everybody knows everybody, but I've been thinking a lot about that. And like, I walk around Caro and there's so many people I don't know.
Yeah.
And I start to think about it, that it's like Dearborn, these places that are claustrophobic,
Right.
it's not so much that everybody knows everybody, it's that everybody knows somebody who knows something about somebody. And then that makes it even worse, where these stories, the telephone game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We do have Dan here, and keeping an eye on time, we are at quarter after, so time to open it up to questions.
Again, we'll take some.
Nothing from, well, Sherry just wrote. So
Oh, okay,
Sherry-
Sherry's got a question. Hi, Sherry.
Sherry says both of you have written very beautifully, both of you, about unique communities of people tied to specific places in the process of change, usually on multiple levels. From a craft perspective, how did you manage the depiction of the changing times and places through the very personal points of views of these characters? And what do you think is the most important about telling stories of these particular characters and places?
Caro, the things that, so I have wind turbines on the cover of mine because when I was growing up, it was the cell phone towers coming in, and people always had things to say about cell phone towers, but that was before social media. And then the wind turbines started coming in, and social media had took over, and misinformation was really starting to get cooking. And I would see these signs about what a wind turbine would do, and if you get too many of them pointing one direction, it could alter the tilt of the earth and all these conspiracy theories. It turns geese into zombies and stuff like that. And for me, it's like there's a lot that's stayed the same about the Thumb of Michigan, and that's one of the things I love, and that's one of the things many people love about these places. But when we have there's no way that the Thumb can't change with the times. Everybody has a cell phone. The internet exists. We have high-speed internet now in rural. I had dial-up internet when I was a college kid, but they have high-speed internet now, and that's only going to open the space. The physical space stays the same, but technology changes them, and that's what I see.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you said that, because I was thinking about it's apparent in both of these collections of like capturing a place over time.
Yeah.
And the way, in terms of craft, the way to do that is by setting short stories in different time periods.
Yeah.
Where you have the recession, you have like that flood in the 80s, right?
Yep.
So you kind of get to see how the place has evolved over time.
Yeah.
And in writing Dearborn, it was really important to me to show how diverse the city is.
Yeah.
And by writing from many different points of view. And I thought that would give me a chance to tell stories from different generations, in setting these short stories in different time periods, it allowed me to dramatize how much Dearborn has changed
Yeah.
over time. Because like the Dearborn that I know that I've experienced is completely different than the Dearborn from the 1990s or 1980s.
Yeah.
It's really changed so significantly. And even now, in the past year or two, there's such a strong and the Yemeni American community has always been strong, but especially now you see so many Yemeni owned businesses around town, which is incredible. And just in a short span of a couple of years,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, I guess in terms of craft perspective, it's like setting the short stories in different time periods.
I went home about 6-7 years ago, and there was this brand new sandwich shop in downtown Caro, and it felt different. Like I was walking around downtown Caro, and my first thought was, there's a millennial on city council. And there was a millennial a year older than me who was on city council. And I was like, oh, this feels like a place I want to walk. Yeah, it's not a place that was tailored for another generation.
Yeah.
Good question.
Anything, questions from the audience?
I have one,
Yeah.
and I'm sure Raymond's not surprised that I'm asking a question. First of all, I want to say to you, because I've known you since you were a tiny little boy,
Me.
how proud I am. Second of all, the one thing I don't know, Ray, is how long it took you to write this book, and I'd like to know about Dearborn as well. How long did it take?
It took about maybe 3 years. Yeah, but I spent a lot of time just thinking about it, you
Yeah,
know, so
yeah.
much time just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And you know, there are 10 short stories in the collection, but there are there are actually 3 short stories that I also just scrapped. Like I didn't want to include them in the book. Because I just didn't think they were working well. I didn't think they were strong enough. I didn't think that they were offering something new thematically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess around like 3 years.
Same, I was thinking about Enough to Lose when I was during the Great Recession, so about 2012, 2013, when I was mowing those lawns. But the writing of it, I took a hiatus and decided to get a PhD because I wanted to have my feelings hurt. So there was 5 years where it just sat on the back. But when it took off, from the time Justin took me on to when it got published, it was just under 3 years. Yeah, so just about 3 years. There was 10 stories in this book, and one of them was a ghost story about chopping wood. And Justin said, there's no other ghost stories, you got to get rid of it. And I was like, if you can get this book published, I'll do whatever you want. But he was right. It wasn't working thematically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so about 3 years.
One other quick question, are either of you currently working on new?
Yeah, actually I said this last night at an event, and like speaking of like again about students, and I always tell my creative writing students to write about what they're obsessed about.
Yeah.
Because like if you're really obsessed with a certain subject matter, it will show on the page. So my obsession with Dearborn has only gotten worse. It's like so I'm writing more. I have like a project in mind about Dearborn. It's so funny because if I can answer this question, because it relates to something you said about when I was asking about like where you get some of the ideas, and you mentioned also just like kind of keeping your ears open and listening to people, what stories they have to tell, right? And like it just to share this anecdote, it's kind of funny in the sense that there's this restaurant in Dearborn that has a really unique history. And I went to check it out. But before that, so that was I think around like noon maybe today, or 12:31. But before that, I had like this really big heavy breakfast at Al Tayyib, which is like this really popular Lebanese brunch restaurant. And I was just so full. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to eat until like later this evening. But I was like, I need to do this research about this restaurant. And I went there, and I was like, I can't just enter restaurants for asking questions, you know? So I sat down at a booth, I ordered food. And I was forcing myself to eat like falafel and like I was like sick to my stomach. Like I had to keep eating because I was like, I had to ease myself into this conversation. And so I started speaking to the waiter who had like this incredible story. That he actually used to be a detective in Beirut, Lebanon. And his family now, yeah, it's amazing. And he's been in Dearborn since 1990. But I was interested in like the history of this restaurant. And he gave me some insight into it. We exchanged numbers. I actually told him I'm gonna drop off a copy of the book tomorrow as a thank you and all that stuff. But like, so I guess, yeah, to answer your question, I'm still writing about Dearborn and part of that process is just also absorbing the city, keeping your ears open. So that's what I've been doing, yeah.
Yeah. I'm working on, I just got notes back on a novel that I had been writing for the last 4 years. So I'm gonna spend the summer working on that. And I started another novel that follows an extremely zealous religious family in rural Michigan. But instead of setting that character, the main character, being from that small city, she's gonna be from Allen Park. Because I'm familiar with Allen Park and I can write about that place. And she's going to be an outsider from the thumb. So the first 2 projects that I've had were very much from insiders who are thumb buddies. And I kind of wanted to write a little bit different. It's still very much set in the thumb. There's a very religious family. They all live under one roof and the dad is the worst.
Do they have a cat?
No, they wouldn't have cats. No, they wouldn't have cats at all. Cats are tools of the devil. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on. Yeah.
Well, this may seem like a redundant question, but I find this effective. Write what you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we get write what you know, and then also like talk to people who know more than you or know different from you.
Yeah.
And allow them to teach. One of the great things about being a writer and being a teacher is that we're constantly learning.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Anything more online? Okay, sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, for aspiring writers, like, what would you say would be like a good place to start with doing local field work for writing stories, and how does that differ between short stories and novels?
Yeah.
I love the short story. I love the format. I think it's gorgeous. And I'm trying to break my students from thinking that short stories are tiny novels. Like I've been saying lately that it's the difference between looking at acrylic paintings and watercolor paintings. Like you still got a book in front of you, but they are so vastly different. The strokes are different, the rules are different, and then still vastly similar. When it comes to short stories, like I said, I always see like endings. Endings in short stories folks call them open endings, but I like to balance what I call acute conflict and chronic conflict. So acute conflict is just a task. I need to get money in this chicken. I need to paint this wall. There are things that are engaging for the eye, for your readers, that get them to turn the next page. And then they've got some kind of big goal. I'm stuffing money in this chicken because in the end, I want to build a house in Lebanon. I want to do that. That's the far goal. And that's the promise that you're making your readers. Hey, reader, we're going to acknowledge this by the end. And then there's chronic conflict, and chronic conflict can be the umbrella that's over the story. That's whether it's ICE agents, that ties in immigration status, race, income. Income is throughout all of this, folks. So some people will have read my book or read stories, and they're like, if life is so bad in the thumb, why don't they just leave? Well, they can't afford to leave.
Right.
So really, it's as easy as giving them something to do. Instead of just sitting thinking about big ideas, give them something to do and have something get in the way of it. So for me, with that first story, it's a flood. It's literally just man versus nature. It's a flood. They can't paint the house because water's coming in. And then they have to get stuff out of the house. And then they have to survive the rain. And that rain is just constant. And then that's for the short. That's what I think about short stories. I don't know. I haven't published a novel yet. So your guess is as good as mine.
What are you working, which form are you working on? Are
I'm
you?
currently writing a novel.
Okay.
But no, I love short stories. But
Yeah, see, now in terms of like, in terms of like, the publishing business, it is difficult. Editors love like novels. They want to publish novels because they sell much better than short story collections. But I think these are both our debut books and they're both short story collections. So there are always exceptions to that, right? But so like one piece of advice that people say is that if you also really like, so you said you really like short stories, is to you know, write that novel, and if you have a short story collection on the side, you try to kind of market them together.
Yeah.
That's actually worked for some people, right? But it's really you know, I think short story collections can stand on their own. I mean, like if you're like a debut writer or emerging writer, especially when they're like they're linked and they're about a specific place, right? That works really well too. I think people are editors are open to that.
Yeah,
Publishing houses,
No,
readers.
they might call them novels and stories.
Right.
That's all marketing and
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
and yeah, but I'll also read. Right, nonsense. I mean, you got the book in your hand right now.
Yeah.
You're a reader, obviously.
Yeah.
Read outside your perspective. Read
Yeah.
women. Read trans women. Read people of color. This I was told that. I always thought that this was an extremely white book, and I thought that was a shortcoming of it. And I read it. A high school down in Clarksville read it, and they're like, "What do these characters look like?" And I was like, "I don't know. They look like me." And they're like, "No, those characters are black." And I was like,
Amazing.
"Oh, oh." And then they did drawings of my characters, and they
Wow.
showed them, and all the characters were black. And I'm like, "Oh, well, then they know more than I do."
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But people are people.
Yeah,
Regardless
exactly.
What color they are,
Yeah.
they go through a lot of the same things.
And they,
Yeah.
and that student saying that was just like,
Right.
was just like such a joy to hear. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that means that in our writer head, we're seeing certain things.
Right.
But the reader is just like, that self-insert is wonderful for the reader. They get to put themselves, it means we did something right.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, a really quick one. Have either of you gotten any memorable responses from folks from Carroll or from Dearborn, even beyond your friends and family, but folks who are native to these places who have said something memorable, either positive, negative?
I just got my first negative review. Yeah. Yeah, so Cal Freeman's back there, and Sarah Pazer, they're lovely writer, lovely poets, just lovely people. And you're in that comment section, and I don't know who that person is, but they really hate Enough to Lose. They think this book was cliche drivel, not worth reading.
Oh my God.
Because I write about the tough side of the thumb. Like, I love the thumb, and there's so much beauty in this space. I love going back to the thumb. But Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols built the Oklahoma City bombs there. Like, there is a reckoning that the thumb has to face. They have to. And I have having the distance with the thumb is my ability to be like, hey, there's so much love here, but we got to be critical about some of these things. And I guess that individual I don't want to give this person so much power because it's just a Facebook comment, but I've gotten a ton of love. My family's here. They love the book. Yeah. It's just a bad Amazon review, and which means I'm doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah, I got one, it's so touching. I still need to respond to it, but I actually got a handwritten letter that was mailed to my office in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And the letter is from this physician. He lives out in Portland, Oregon. And it's like this beautiful handwritten letter, and it begins with, I'm not sure why I'm even handwriting this letter, but I felt compelled to. And so he's Arab American, Lebanese American. He was born and raised in Dearborn. But then he in the letter, he said that he just had to leave. He wanted to see something bigger than Dearborn, and he's been outside of Dearborn for years, maybe over 20 years. He just, he's settled in Portland.
Yeah.
And he said, like, reading the book kind of took him back to the Dearborn that, you know, he grew up in. So that was just really
Yeah.
meaningful, I think. People from the like, from Dearborn, I'm sure from like, you know, from the thumb, I think when those readers like comment on it and they say, you know, you took us back to that place.
Yeah,
That means so much to me.
Oh,
Yeah,
so, and you're able to do it because you lived there for 5 years and one in the eighties or the nineties, and he
Right.
was there in the eighties and the
Yeah,
nineties.
yeah.
That means you nailed it. Like, I wasn't even born I was born in 1989, and when I read The Mirror in Caro, and there was an old county commissioner, and he was like, you took me, and he was getting choked up, this retired man who was just like, I was driving the devastation in 86.
Wow.
And he goes, how'd you know? I was like, I listen to people. I asked questions about what was 86 like, and I
Yeah.
read the old newspapers.
Yeah.
Yes, so gosh, and you should frame it.
No, I have it. I have it. It's such a beautiful letter, but, and so I'm actually, he gave me his address, so I'm gonna mail him. I actually wanted to mail him a handwritten letter.
That's
I have terrible handwriting, but.
same.
So, thank you very much for coming tonight. There are surveys out on the table out front. If you can, that'd be great if you could fill that out.
Oh, for sure.
Michigan Notable Book programs. But want to say thank you, and books are on sale outside.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.